Hello, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is your Nature Journal Educators Forum. We'll be just getting ourselves started in a moment. Missed you. I've been traveling a little bit and and had some interesting nature journaling experiences and some interesting nature journaling teaching opportunities. Um, and I want to report to you folks on that. Um, Today, what if you folks are game for it, I'd love to share my we had a nature journal workshop on drawing underwater, and I had a chance to go down to the Sea of Cortez and follow around with the Western Flyer, which is the boat that Steinbeck and Ed Ricketts were on when the for the Adventure of the Log for the Sea of Cortez was written, and was with a bunch of marine biologists. And as part of that, we did a lot of snorkeling and I did underwater nature journaling, and I wanted to share that with you. And but as educators, I'd like to sort of share with you kind of what I found was working and what wasn't working. And if if you were to develop a program to kind of facilitate other people being able to do this, what kind of logistics might we set up? Um, and so I now have a little bit of personal experience with it under my belt, and but wanted to for us to strategize how could we turn that into a um, a nature journaling experience that would be accessible for lots of people, and kind of to make that easy. Um, but before we kind of go that direction, I also wanted to welcome all of you. If this is your first time to the Nature Journal Educators Forum, what this is a weekly get together of people who are involved in different aspects of nature journaling and nature education. And we kind of groupthink an idea. We'll sort of take an idea and look at it from everybody's perspectives to see how we can, with this sort of hive mind, come to better strategies of um, teaching whatever it is that we are looking at. Um, and to so why don't we? I want to invite everybody in the chat to kind of write a quick introduction to yourself, and then we will. And if there's anything that is on your mind that you wished to share, please drop that in. Um, I also um, wanted to thank you, Star. Um, this a little care package came, and I've just started to read into this little book, and I think this is something that I really need right now. So thank you so much for sharing this little book of wisdom of Thich Nhat Hanh, and I will be I'm already enjoying that. So I read slowly because of my dyslexia. But folks, please feel free to drop into the chat any introduction, who you are, and what your our interests are. Um, oh yeah, Kate, this is that we might have to have a field trip to Hawaii, just so we can kind of get a critical mass of us um, nature journaling together and really explore uh, what it's like to nature journal underwater, and to do that with a group. I think that could be a ton of fun. Um, so again, everybody, if you feel comfortable doing so, please feel free to drop a quick introduction into the chat. Um, and the and we'll be starting in just a moment. Well, why wait? Let's start. Um, the so maybe what I can do is I'll start off by explaining what I did and what my experience was. And let's see, where is my here's my little palette. Um, so what I did is I had a little underwater drawing system, um, a little tablet like this. On the back were strapped some pencils, and the I found that the uh, the metal hinge almost started to rust almost immediately when I brought it down in and out of salt water. And so I covered that with electric tape because it was starting to kind of put rust stains on my stuff. But I would bring strap a couple of pieces of paper to here and draw on that with graphite pencils. The secret was we had a nature journaling workshop with an amazing underwater naturalist, Mandy, who uh, showed us the trick of working on something called stone paper. Stone paper, also called mineral paper. And that's the big secret. It is paper that is made it is made um, from minerals, from rock, instead of from paper. And so it doesn't absorb water, so watercolor not happening. And it you can it dries fairly quickly, and you can draw on it out of the water, but you can also bring it underneath the water, and it takes graphite very, very well. So regular graphite pencils, these are just like a Dixon Ticonderoga #2 pencils like you used in elementary school when you were filling out a test or writing a paper. The classic #2 pencils. I just brought a bunch of those and had some extras in case I lost one. I ended up not losing any, but the um, that was my drawing system. Originally, I thought that I would be able to use colored pencils underwater. Before I left, I took all my colored pencils of different brands and I put them into a big bucket of water and had them sit there for a while, and then found that a lot of them were getting mushy and gummy. And so I didn't want that. And there's also just more stuff to manage. So I decided I'm going to do color when I get back to shore on the page, but just take notes underwater because the graphite pencil was working really well. A few kind of logistical things. What I found myself doing is as I would go swimming along with my little tablet, I would take it and I would hold it against my body like this as I was flipping along with my big flipper fins. And that way it otherwise was sort of catching the water. I'm very curious to test what it's like to draw on a larger tablet. I found this size. Um, it was very portable, but I think that because it's hard to hold this, the whole drawing system was pretty wobbly. In the past, I think I've got a larger clipboard over here. There we go. I think if I had something regular clipboard size, then what you can do is you can lock that against your body like this. So you take your arm and you wrap it around. I'll often do this with my sketchbook when I'm standing up. So if I'm standing and sketching, I'll hold my journal and brace it against my body. And then that makes a kind of hard sketching platform. And I'm thinking that with a larger piece of stone paper and a larger clipboard, that might that might work better. So this I found it was jerky to be swimming and sketching, but I think that if I had something where I could really tuck it into my body, that might work better. I haven't experimented with that though, so I don't know. But why don't I show you my kind of the results of what I did. So again, my process would be go underwater, make graphite notes and sketches of everything that I saw. The when it was wavy on the top, I found I was wobbling more, and these sketches they ended up rather rough. So they're a little bit kind of herky jerky, kind of bumpy edges. At the start, I was working small, and had a real hard time drawing. And then I started working larger, which might be another reason to kind of go for something this size. I think that that will be the way to go. So sketching a little bit larger would be a good move. And when I would get to the surface, I would dry the paper, just sort of lay it out. In a few minutes, it would be dry, and then I would go over that with a ballpoint pen or another graphite pencil and add colored pencil to it. Originally, I tried to add watercolor to it. This sort of paper, it just the watercolor puddles and pools and doesn't want to dry. So ixnay on the watercolor. And but I had a great time using colored pencils. So let me show you about my adventures underwater. And so here's my my journal. This was a trip with the Western Flyer Foundation. This is the Western Flyer here. It was the first time that this boat had returned to the Sea of Cortez since the um, Steinbeck Ed Ricketts journey more than 80 years ago. So lots of sort of regular journaling. Um, and there are a bunch of scientists who were also along on the expedition. We got to check out the research that they were doing, which was a lot of fun. Um, so sort of standard tide pooling and sketching and mangrove investigation. But what? Oh, I think oh, here we go. So this was my first experience. If you look sort of in the background, there is graphite pencil behind all of these little things. That was what was done. And you see there's little letters, little lines pointing to things saying colors of things. In the middle of this little fish, it says BN, that's for brown. And then um, this was watercolor. And so I was not pleased with the way that that went. And then this little puffer fish down here with a little target on its back. That was the first one I did with the colored pencils, and I went, ooh, I like this much, much, much better. So for the rest of the time, I just used the colored pencils. Um, Here, starting to work a little bit larger with a fish, so you can see some of the drawing underwater, then kind of going over that. The inking here is all post, so once I get up, the paper dries. Um, Here, again, the graphite pencil that is in the background, and you can see here just how jerky the drawing was. So it was not rather detailed, but once you get out and you aren't moving around as much. But because I was sketching, it allowed me to get so my process on this was I decided what I didn't want to do was to do some sketching underwater, come back, look at some books. There are all these identification books of like, here's the fish of the Gulf of California. And I didn't want to look at that stuff and overwrite my memory. I wanted to see, could I get down enough information on these pieces of paper so that I could then from use those to trigger my memory, finish the sketches, and then go look things up in books. So I didn't look at any of the books, but there was enough information in these little sketches to be able to identify things. So I was using strategies that, for instance, if I was drawing a sea star, I would just really focus on one of its legs and how big the central area was so that I wouldn't have to do as much stuff when I was down underwater. Um, Here were oh here's a little wrasse, and you can see just like this was kind of a little bit bumpy, wavy area, and so you can see that that's making the drawing pretty rough. But there are letters all over it. So, for instance, PU on the tail was for purple. That's because this thing had a purple in the tail, and the So there's little color codes. Um, BE here is for blue. So I'll show you my color code system. Let's see, where's a little dry erase pen? Um, so what I first when I first started kind of coming up with color codes, I would have this for orange and that for white and that for blue. But then I had that for black. And what does that mean? Does it mean gray? Does it mean green? Um, so then I thought, oh, just have the first two letters. So like orange would be OR and G. So green would be GR and gray would be, oh, that didn't work either. What about blue and black? Okay, that's not working. So then what I came up with at the end is first and last letter. So blue is that, and black is that, and green is GN, and GY is gray. And I can get away with white um, and orange and yellow, but um, purple and pink. So this first and last letter for the ambiguous ones kind of gave me a quick shorthand. So I would be out there kind of bouncing around in the water and roughly blocking in the shape of a fish. And then I would have a little line pointing to part of it. And I'd say that this part is BK and this is white and this is orange. And this has blue edge. So um, it also kind of being down there kind of made me realize that I want to come up with a better quick shorthand for diagramming, sort of fast diagramming fish. And I can say more about my initial thoughts on that later if people are interested. But the that was what was going on with the kind of the color coding. Um, So here you see another sea star. This is one that was very variable. It was one species, but sometimes the whole thing would be these spots. Sometimes it was a black grid. Sometimes it'd be kind of pale with dark tips. So I have three legs, each drawn differently. It's all the same species. Um, these fish, again, drawn from these color notes. And um, this was my favorite critter. There was this about sort of a meter long, maybe a little less than a meter long, um, marine worm, more fish, and you can see kind of color notes in these areas here. And you can work on both sides of that paper if you wish to. But that was just sort of a quick hit of my experience um, with 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 doing this. So were we to all descend on go to Kate's house, right? We all take a field trip to Hawaii. Um, what are some logistics that um, we think would make this kind of accessible for a group of people to do? One other logistical thing, I was wearing a wetsuit, and that made me float. And so that made things really, really easy. I could sit there and just kind of bob along. The water, I think if you are doing, were you to be doing stuff with a tank, underwater, you could get below the wave zone, so things might be a little bit le less wave action. But being able to float, and so I had this sort of natural buoyancy. I wasn't worrying about having to stay at the surface. I could just be there with my snorkel and breathe away and go to town. Um, So what do you folks think about, were we to kind of get a group of people together, how would we facilitate a group of people sketching underwater? And what any thoughts and ideas on that? So you can either use the raise hand function, or turn on your camera and raise your hand, and I will see. You like that idea, Kate? Um,
Oh, sorry. Yes, sorry. I was looking at the chat. Leslie was asking if she could contact me if she ever came to Oahu, and I said yes, absolutely. I actually was just on another island this weekend as well, so I'm happy. It's pretty cheap to go between the islands as well. So please let me know if anybody in the nature journaling community is coming out. It's really fun to be able to.
Well, no,
Um,
I think we should seriously let's make this happen. Let's
yeah,
turn this into a little, from a little fantasy thing here to I could see a Hawaii geek out if you'd help me kind of pick, sort of find a place which we could have as a base camp that would be kind of low cost and safe, and that has adjacencies to kind of places. You might be kind of be able to help us sort of figure out kind of how to do that. This wouldn't need to be fancy or anything, but I think
right.
we could have a big ball of fun.
Yeah. I think there's definitely options depending on fanciness level and access to different places. But I think, yeah, I mean, the biggest thing that comes to my mind is just, um, choosing your location wisely for doing this. Even within a quarter mile, you can have not even that, like a completely different coastline, like checking for like riptides and currents and waves, and staying on the beach long enough before you go out to check and make sure you don't have, these bigger sets coming in. And checking the tide, and checking the swell forecast because swell can start coming up. I was out the other day just kind of swimming around, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, these waves are twice as big as they were 15 minutes ago, even.
Mm.
You get these huge swells that kind of build and come up when you're out there. It looks like a calm day, and yeah. So just from a basic safety level, finding a place with a lifeguard would probably be the safest. A lot of the Hawaii beaches don't have lifeguards. A lot of them are, and they only have lifeguards during certain times of the day. And so kind of being aware of those sort of things are really important. Um, Snorkeling is actually a very dangerous activity. People go into cardiac arrest with snorkeling.
Oh,
It's actually the most common cause of death out here in Hawaii is like people, or I mean, for visitors, is for drowning. So
so the
not
light,
to
so
like
how?
freak everybody out, but I think you don't realize there's a higher strain on your system when you're breathing through a snorkel. They're doing a study right now to kind of identify people who are drowning or near drowning or rescue victims and what kind of gear they have. It didn't used to be recorded in the rescues because there's the new like face mask snorkel.
Yeah, I was
Was
really
that what you were
excited about
using, or
getting
was
one
it the
of
traditional
those.
one? Huh?
And then from the little bit of reading that I did about those online, I was thinking of, I'm going to get one of those things where I've got a really good field of view. And then I was reading like, oh yeah, there's all these people just rebreathing their own CO2 in those, and a lot of people are getting into trouble with those.
Yeah. So
So
those are all like really big considerations, obviously. And having a buddy system, that's what we always try to do. I always try to teach my daughter to have a buddy system. You have somebody and you do not leave them. You know, it's your one person and you stay together because then if somebody does get into trouble, you can at least like flip them over and try to help them. Having a life vest, instead. I think what happens is that people. Um, I think a lot of things like times with like the snorkeling and the life vest and that sort of stuff is people get into situations above their pay grade a little bit. They think that they can handle something that they can't, if they don't have that time in the water, they don't know their own body, if don't really have that like the heart and the
yeah,
lung capacity to
yeah,
handle the stressors out there. And you get excited when you're out there. The
it is
biggest
exciting.
You get excited and you see something. And what I I remember when had just moved back out to Hawaii as an adult, I went snorkeling with my husband And I was like under, I was like snorkeling along, and this just giant shape came out of like the darkness towards me, and I panicked. And it was one of these huge turtles, like because they can get like really, really big, the sea turtles. And it just came out of it. And so I panicked and I kind of went backwards, went under, and I breathed in the air, I mean, the water through my snorkel, and you forget that you can take your mask off and just swim like normal. And so, having, especially if I have a group, I would have them practice putting the snorkel mask on, practice taking it off again, just
Yep.
saying, just reminding yourself you can always just rip all that off and just like chill. And you can always, the ocean holds you, and practicing just floating on your back, and being able to do that with whatever sort of flotation gear you have to help you with. Because yeah, if you're starting to panic, if you're starting to feel light of breath, just kind of taking everything off and just like laying and breathing is what I because I've helped, newer swimmers with things. But yeah, the big thing is waves and having it safe, and currents. There's like my favorite place to go snorkeling at is Electric Beach, but the currents can get wicked strong out there. And knowing kind of that feeling of like the ocean is just taking you somewhere different than where you want to go. And how do you manage that? I think a lot of it is your emotional and mental state and being prepared. Sometimes the ocean just takes you and you just kind of have to go with it for a little while, and then it slows down, and then you can kind of go, you never want to go against a current. You always want to go at least at an angle, but probably perpendicular is better. And being prepared, you might end up, further down the coast than you expected,
Yeah.
but you want to just get to land. So those are just things that I always like to kind of talk to people about before they get in the water, is being prepared for all of those. We also have, you've got man of war, you've got, I mean, we also have sharks, of course. Those are always a consideration, but there's not a lot you can do for that except, have a good
Just make sure
attitude
your
coming into
buddy
the
swims slower than
ocean.
you do. Then you're.
Yeah. Well, I just, and the shark thing is also the water quality is super important. Actually, Hawaii has a high instance of cesspools, not to gross everyone out. But once I found that out, I was really kind of horrified. So after really heavy rains, when they say, stay out of the water, they really mean it. We don't have stormwater drain treatment. A lot of certain coastal
Mhm.
communities don't have that. So everything from Malca washes right into the ocean. So timing is really important, in terms of like the water quality. You're much more likely to get into trouble if you have murky water, just on a lot of levels. You want clear water. The angle of the sun can really affect your experience. I mean, that's like a huge one with snorkeling, is if you have a really cloudy day, you don't have as clear, and just depending on the angle of the sun too, it can kind of affect your experience. And um, yeah, those are some things that first come to mind. Oh, the man of war thing is, I always keep Benadryl in my shore bag. And if I have like a wet bag, because I actually there's wet bags you can also carry that float. And so then you also have, oh, that was the other thing. So yeah, I have a like floating wet bag, and it has like a big bright red bubble. And so you want to have like a marker so everybody knows that there are people snorkeling in that area. So any sort of boaters or paddlers coming by can visually see like, oh, wait, there's something coming up ahead. So you don't have a boat just cruise right over you. But having that little bag, you can keep a little bit of water. You can keep aspirin actually uh for heart attacks.
Mhm.
It's chewable, and then a chewable Benadryl in case somebody starts having a anaphylactic reaction to the man o' war or the jellyfish. Um, so those are again, I'm like, oh, I'm making it sound so terrible. It is beautiful and it's amazing. And 99% of the time, you're totally fine. But if you're in charge of a group, you have to think about
Right.
that
Right.
1% and be
Right.
kind of prepared for these kind of outliers. And especially taking a group out, like your level of it. I mean, I've had this be a hard lesson for me, as somebody who lives out here. My level of experience and comfort in the ocean is just not the same as others. And people saying, oh, I'm a good swimmer. But if they don't have time in the ocean specifically, It's just a very different experience because of just those unpredictable effects and of all like the creatures that you're going to see down there, and the temptation to reach out and touch things, which isn't a good idea. And then the being respectful of those creatures and of the coral underneath. Coral, it's as delicate as the skin on top of your nose. That's how thin that layer of like the so because coral's an alive, it's an animal, right? It's not just a rock. And people forget that, and it's a living creature. And so yeah, it's like the skin on the top of your nose. So if you scrape against it, just kind of like you would scrape your nose on something, then it will, kill the coral.
Right.
And so being prepared to not try not to step on the coral, thinking about where you're going out and how you're going out, and looking for kind of open areas if you need to take a break, to kind of get upright, versus horizontal, depending on depth and everything. Um, but yeah, those are my initial thoughts.
Initially you're thinking about so safety
hmm
um, is a if we are kind of doing something as a group is something that we need to take really consider very, very carefully. There's both ethically and from a liability standpoint um, that it is not a light thing to throw a bunch of people in the water with fins and snorkels. Just because we're not doing uh, scuba doesn't mean that there's no risk there. So doing that in a place where we have somebody who's either a place where we go where there is a lifeguard on duty, or we bring our own lifeguard whose job is not to nature journal, whose job is to make sure we come home with the same number of people that we left with, would be a good thing. Buddy system, safety drills, sort of acclimatizing people to the conditions, and some practice with the gear for people who come, who aren't regularly playing in the ocean. So even though I live next to the Pacific here in California, it's cold water and I'm not out there much at all. Um, so getting, as Susan's suggesting, um, get some experts who are this is their job to lead these sorts of things, sort of do this in cooperation with somebody else rather than just kind of winging it.
Yeah.
So I like your also ideas, from, what are your first aid kits? How do you kind of mark that there are divers in the area? Um, and then also, so that's care of the group. You're also pointing out care of the organisms that are out there. So training people on what does ethical snorkeling look like, in terms of the critters. How does it look like? What does it look like in terms of yeah, the respect and care of all those sea animals and the fish. Um, and also depending on where you're going, in a lot of places, even the sunscreen that you use makes a difference. We now are finding that a bunch of the Neutrogena that I use for my hikes here around California, a number of those are even banned in Hawaii and other places, because they're not reef safe. And so making sure that were we to do this, this would be a really good place to teach um, treading softly in nature. Um, and I think that could I see, rather than that being a hassle, I see that as actually being a feature of something like this, that we'd have a real opportunity to talk about, like, how do we do this in a way that is nature safe? Because we want to have all of our practices be nature safe and be respectful for critters. Even if we're, walking around on the land. Um, those are really good considerations. And I think that would be a fun thing to add to the program.
Yeah. Um, I was gonna just kind of respond to some of the questions that people came up with. Um, the motion sickness is an issue. I got dive certified and almost puked into my like breather, and they said if you need to puke, just puke and just take it out and puke and put it back in. So that was exciting to realize. Yeah, so motion sickness can be definitely an issue. Um, yes, there are amazing bugs in Hawaii and all sorts of different things. There are surfboards or boogie boards that have windows in them, or you can create your own box. And so instead of putting your head down in the water, you're carrying your clipboard on top of something and just kind of looking down. And that's also if you get the right like angle of the sun and the right day and the right location, you can honestly just kind of see right through some of this crystal clear water and see a lot of the fish, which is a better option for somebody who, isn't comfortable putting their face in the water for any kind of reason. Um, there is Honama Bay is a great place. They do like a kind of intro thing. They have like a whole video that talks about what you're going to see and proper behaviors, and they talk about all the sunscreen. You want to use, I always just use either a zinc or titanium or a mix, like a mineral-based sunscreen. I don't use any of those chemical things because I just don't know what any of those do. It makes you pretty white. Um, I'm whiter than I already am.
Yeah.
But they last the longest, they work the best. And then any sort of physical covering too, like you can get, I mean, I always wear like a long sleeve, even if I'm not wearing a wetsuit, I'll wear like a long sleeve tight rash guard, like long sleeve tight
Yeah.
pants, you can even get like a hood you can put on. What are some other places? Oh, people were asking about being able to stand up. So fish like coral, like they love having a place to hide around. So there's not a whole lot of locations, at least in Hawaii. I know because there's some other locations are different, but in Hawaii, you're gonna have to have a place with coral, and if there's coral, you can't really stand up. There's not a whole lot of places where there's just kind of like clumps of coral and then sand in between. Ka'ohao, Lanikai kind of area, you can do that a little bit, but generally it's going to be kind of hard to find a spot where you can like stand up and put your face down. So having something like a board that you has a window in it or something might be a better option if you're not a great swimmer. Or honestly, tide pools. Like I love just hanging out at the tide pools, getting the tide right and looking at all the little beings that live in there. I still a lot of times use like a waterproof page because you get real down and then a wave comes. And even if you're prepared for it, you can hear it coming and you go, oh, and you get splashed. And so I'll use like the Right in the Rain little books for my tide pooling experiences. There's because if anybody doesn't know what a tide pool is, right, is you get the the water comes in, it covers an area, and if there's, a dip in the rock, water goes out and all the little baby fish and stuff are left behind, which can be really fun. Um, and baby safe sunscreens are the right sort of thing. Yeah, so it's a reef safe. There's a lot of overlap. So if you look at the back, if it's just the main ingredients are the two mineral, either of those two mineral ones, it's going to be the best
It,
bet.
it, it will say reef safe on it.
Yeah, a lot of them are starting to say reef safe on them. If you're looking for that. Oh, and then glass bottom boats. Yes. So my auntie used to run a glass bottomed boat tour, and so I grew up going out for free with her and hearing her, talk about the geology and everything of the bay over and over again. And actually, part of my like wedding activities is everybody went out on the glass bottom boat.
Oh,
Because I was like, this
that's
is
really
so
sweet.
core to who I am. Yeah. So, yeah, glass bottom boat tours are a great option too for people who can't. Um, uh, yeah. Okay. Sorry. I just wanted to address all
Yeah.
those.
Oh, that's great. Um, Kate, is it all right to keep you on here as our region expert? Hold on a second. I have done something. Okay, now good. My screen is back. Um, all right. So then to um, it seemed to me that sort of equipment wise, I could probably go get a bunch of sort of just PVC boards, and the rubber band did a great job of holding the paper down. Um, and then on the back, Mandy suggested these. This is something that just sort of came from I did a search for pen holders, um, and These I got online, and I'm going to get another set to hold them on the bottom, so that they would be kind of locked in like that. Um, and this so we could I think that if we're kind of doing this with a group to supply people with a bunch of um, kind of pre-made boards might be easier than everybody having to do it themselves. And then get a bunch of the mineral paper. And I'm curious to experiment with a number of different kinds of mineral paper. Do you have any experience with that of kind of looking at different?
I've just used the Right in the Rain. I had those little, they have like little, and the Field Notes also has a waterproof one that I've used, and I've used those in the, it's like pouring rain, and that worked with the graphite. And I just got the Right in the Rain notebook. I can show you what I do.
Yeah.
So I just started, but this is so when I go out on the stand-up paddleboard, and I'll just kind of sit on the stand-up paddleboard sometimes too and journal, and then go visit different places. But I started um, keeping a kind of journal too. So keeping
Yeah.
so this was actually the tide pool that's on an island right offshore from near where I live. And so I was just kind of standing there about waist deep in the water and just looking down in the water and being able to identify
Yeah.
and draw all these little fish.
It's great.
And
And I found that very often the the view from above, sort of looking down on the back of the fish, I was getting that view a lot. And so that being a big thing that they don't have that in the field guides, but that area kind of looking down on the fish shoulders. Uh,
yeah, I think that's like I always feel like it's a like I understand why field guides don't have all of the different views. And then and the big thing with fish too is that juvenile fish versus adult fish can look completely different. Like
oh yeah.
wrasse change dramatically. And so if you have one picture of a species of wrasse, it's like not capturing it at all. And I don't know, and I downloaded some apps onto my phone, and a lot of those still just have one photo. And I'm like, dudes, this is your opportunity to really show this whole life cycle, how it looks as it changes, and the different like genders and the different, seasons too. I mean, I
Yes.
think some fish change over seasons. So it's kind of surprising that that hasn't, I mean, maybe there is some app that is like really good that kind of does that. But yeah, there isn't kind of like the eBird version of for fish. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
but yeah.
Um, when I was down there, there were these critters here. They were about this long and just beautiful with this yellow stripe over their shoulders. Sometimes they were swimming with the little stripy ones. Ooh. And I couldn't find the little stripy ones in the book. And until one found in one guide, those were the young stage of the yellow over the shoulder ones. It was the same fish. Kind of reminded me of when paleontologists were finding, these big triceratops skeletons and assembling them. And sometimes in the same areas, they found this other species of smaller triceratops that didn't have a horn on the top of its head, but still had a little bit of a frill, kind of a smaller frill. And it took people a while. I think it was Jack Horner who figured out that, wait a minute, hmm, when we have, a baby bighorn, it doesn't have big horns. Um, and that these little ceratopsians um, with very sort of simple frill and no horns, that in a bunch of these cases we were looking at juvenile or baby triceratops or other ceratopsians, and that's just cool. Um, so let's see. So we'd want to kind of dial in the safety. You'd want to dial in and this would also be just I love the idea of using this as a place just for thinking really critically about how to ethically be in a place. Because I think very often we don't think about those sorts of things. We will have a tendency to a tendency to, if everybody else is getting that close to the nesting birds, then it's probably fine for me. And so there's this sort of incremental creep up closer. And you know, very often, my sense is like if my behavior changes the behavior of the bird or the critter that I'm looking at, I'm too close. And the but we often don't think about those sorts of things. Um, and so this might also be kind of just a good place for thinking about kind of what does ethical nature geeking look like?
Yeah, on that note too, one thing I want to emphasize too is different areas have different abundance of things, right? And
Yeah.
so both it can be misleading. Like there's the IO, which is the neck stilt, I think is the English name. That is it's an endemic subspecies. And it's really abundant on the Marine Corps base. And so I was talking to some kids who were like, oh yeah, we throw rocks at them. And I said, those are like critically endangered, and that on the military base is like one of their most robust populations. And so it looks like there's a whole lot. So you can just say, oh, it doesn't matter because there's so many of this fish or there's so much of this. And it might just be like the only place in the world that there is a lot of that. And then on the other hand, some places, there's certain things that if there are a lot of them and they're a really common species, it might be more okay, like with the hermit crabs. If there's a lot of hermit crabs running around, and we know hermit crabs are doing really well if you pick one up and, in order for education and for that experience and connection to kind of let it, tickle across your hand for a minute and just to say, wow, this is really amazing and beautiful because it helps give you that
Yeah.
energy to like continue protecting places and to teach others about, how amazing this teeny tiny little creature that you might not even seen is crawling across the ocean floor and then putting it back down. But I wouldn't do that if it's the only hermit crab I found. Like that's
Mhm.
that, I think Robin Wall Kimmerer talks about that is you don't take the first one you see, you don't take all of them, So if you
Right.
are picking up and kind of encountering nature a little bit and trying to be careful about it, those are some things to consider. The Honu, the green sea turtle, is, such a great example out here, and also the monk seal. I mean, that's like a safety issue too. Like, do not approach the monk seal. They will bite. But they're also, critically endangered. And the sea turtles will also bite. And you can also get apparently it used to be a thing that people would grab onto the back of those sea turtles. And so then the sea turtle would dive down, and then you would, would pull you along as like a
Like a little
it's a
scooter.
thing in the 70s, like, woo, wow, I'm gonna ride a sea turtle. And yeah, we don't do that anymore. But I've also heard stories of people when it does that, your fingers get stuck between the shell and the turtle. And I'm like, I don't really feel bad for you if that happens to you, because
Oh,
why were you doing that in the first place?
yeah.
Um, so yeah, it's interesting again because you hear other people doing it. It sounds like a cool idea. It seems like there's a lot of this turtle, or it doesn't seem like it's that big of a deal or something. And people do things that
And
um
and then to also just to throw into the mix of as educators, something that I find myself thinking about on a regular basis is like the more kind of hands-on connected sort of wilderness without kind of going off the trail essentially. Um, and the more that you're able to sort of pick up the critter and sort of have a personal experience with it. Um, that helps us develop a personal connection with things. And then we also want to think about what is the impact of doing that on the environment or on the critter. Um, and where is it appropriate to do these sorts of things. So I'm an advocate for kind of hands-on personalized experiences, but I'm also an advocate for taking care of nature and kind of having what are um, having my practices be respectful and sustainable for the place that I am. And I don't think that those are incompatible, but it needs to be an intentional conversation and something that we're thinking about.
Yeah. Oh yeah, just for the record though, you're not allowed to be within 10 feet of a turtle. But if the turtle approaches you, there's like, yeah, that's okay. I was like, they like to. They actually are really curious and they want to come up to you. And you can just chill out and they'll just kind of
Yeah.
swim around you and go away. But you aren't, just for the record, not allowed to grab them and swim with them. It's illegal. But yeah, there is, I agree. And I think this is something that I always struggle with. And at the beginning, when we first started talking about people coming out to Hawaii, I was just really nervous because like how do you do it in an ethical way? Because the places I want to bring you, I don't necessarily want a ton of people coming.
Yeah.
And if they do come, how do you do that in a very respectful way? There are certain areas that are designated as kind of like for tourists and to allow people to come. And so you have, certain areas like that. And so trying to find that balance between those experiences. Do you go to a place that is like really like lots of people go to and it's kind of like the place people go to and so it's just really heavily impacted
Yeah.
but then
Yeah.
you're not having quite the same experience and it has bathrooms. Oh, that's a big thing too, is like bathrooms.
I'll put that down on the list.
I mean, I think peeing in the ocean is fine, but having those sort of options, and also being able to clean up afterwards and having fresh water to rinse out. Oh, that was a big thing too, is I wanted to mention cuts. Coral cuts are really dangerous, and you really would need to make sure if you do end up actually getting scraped by coral, because it is a living being, and there's tons of things. Um, everybody's like, ocean water is so clean. There's a lot of beings and
Yeah.
bacteria and algae and everything that's growing in the ocean. The ocean's really alive, and I think people tend to forget that.
Well,
So
can I tell you
having a
a
place to
fun
clean up.
story on that?
Oh yeah.
So one of the people on there was there was a researcher on board the Western Flyer who was doing this crazy cool research. Um, so his name was Adrian. He was from Mexico, and he had these bottles, these Niskin bottles that he would send down. And the way that it works is there's a big tube, and um, there are these two caps on the end that are kind of held off by on little elasticized strings. If you and then there is a trigger mechanism. If you push that, these caps come flip around and they capture water inside the bottle. So they would send this down to different depths of water, drop a weight down the line, which would hit the trigger, capture water at that height, and then check this out. They bring it up to the surface, this chunk of water, and like, sure, you can get the salinity, the temperature, these sorts of things. Yeah, 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 yeah. But what they can do now is they can test the DNA, ribosomal DNA that is just floating around in the water, and um, they are able to then identify these random little floaters of DNA that last, I guess, once they kind of left the body of something, they then just float around in the water for a few days before they degrade. So you know that within the last few days, you can figure out exactly what species it comes from, and they could get on these um, uh, 30 to 50% of the DNA in the sample that they would get, they were able to identify to what species or group this is. So a chunk of water is filled with DNA, and they're now able to identify those. And as we get the genomics of more species figured out, that that 50 to 70% that is unknown is going to get smaller and smaller and smaller. So they can take these samples that they have, the full study, and as we kind of in the future, let's say 30 years from now, somebody figures out like here is the genetics of some random marine worm that can then be plugged into the database that they're collecting now. And they'll be able to look like, oh, yeah, 30 years ago, this was sampled over here in the Sea of Cortez. It was there then. I mean, that's crazy, right? Wow. So that's fun. But yeah, you're right. So the water is these chunks of water are filled with um, the DNA of all the species that are swimming around in there, and as well as whatever they have pooped out. And yeah, there's a full microbiome going on floating around down there.
And I want to emphasize, like, I feel like humans lived by the sea, right? Like we have lived by the sea for most of our evolution, like by these bodies of water. So there's kind of this sense I tell people about all this, and then they just kind of go, like, I'm not getting in the water then. And I go, wait,
Oh,
wait, no, no, no. It's
that's right.
so intrinsic to our development and just the idea that like things are gross and we shouldn't be in them. Like we're it's part of life. And
Yes.
but you do need to kind of just be aware that if you have an open wound, what can happen. And so different sorts of just being a little bit more cautious about an open wound, especially just in a tropical area in general, is going to be just a little bit more something you take seriously than other places. But that is so fascinating that they can like figure out
Isn't that
the
mad?
DNA of every. I mean, yeah.
Let's go, science. Um, we've got we want to also invite anybody else who's got kind of ideas about um, kind of logistics for kind of how because what we're trying to figure out like we actually really want to go do this with people and how can we do that in a way that is responsible and safe and fun and we get the most out of it. And so that's why we want to pick all of your brains on how we kind of go about this. So if you're listening to this conversation and you're thinking, um, the so if you're new to this conversation but you have an idea, please just raise your hand or use the raise hand function in Zoom, and we will add you into the screen here if you don't mind being on the screen, or otherwise your voice will just be broadcast to everybody, and we want to include you in on the conversation. If anybody has other thoughts about getting our sort of education with uh, sort of marine sketching going. Oh, here's one other thing I'll add to this. The northern part of the Gulf of California was cold. The southern part was warm. And what a difference it made in my ability to sketch when the water was warm. Because I was just like, oh, I'm gonna stay here forever. But when it was cold, I had my arms like this, kind of tucked up against me, and like I was so distracted by it that it was hard to kind of get into the zen of sketching. Um, the so I think as folks are thinking about this as educators, in the warm part, I was thinking that, I really wanted to get my daughters out there snorkeling around and sketching because I thought they'd have a ton of fun. Because we've been snorkeling at Catalina Island, and it's really, really cold water, and their little bodies can stay in for a little while, but then they're just shivery people. And when we're hypothermic, we don't think well. And sort of one of the things I always talk to sort of nature journal educators, we kind of want to think about like Maslow's hierarchy and how that relates to nature journaling. If if you're cold, you're not really nature journaling. If you're hungry feels, those basic level needs, survival needs aren't taken care of. It's harder to kind of get into the curiosity and the self-actualization tip of the Maslow pyramid. Warm water snorkely with sketchy. hmm that's some tasty. Um, let's bring Susan Beckhart in on the conversation here. Um, and I'm going to add you into the spotlight. Whoops, sorry. I'm sorry, my bad. You're not Susan. I'm going to try that one more time. Let's see, there we go. Susan. Hey, Susan. Welcome to the
Hey there.
spot.
Yeah, good to be here. Yeah, this is great. I'm so excited. Um, yeah, so the thing I was thinking in relation to sort of how can we make this happen? First of all, this is really cool because I've been thinking about for the last year or so trying to take a trip down to like the southern tip of Florida and go to a couple of the national parks and some of the other interesting places that are like really, very tropical, have a lot of coral reefs, a lot of things. But I'm not a snorkeler. I think I snorkeled once when I was a child, and I'm not a good swimmer. And so I was honestly thinking about is it like am I going to get anything out of this trip where it seems like what most people talk about these things is snorkeling. So um, this is what kind of led me down this thinking here because first of all, these ideas would definitely would work for something I would do there. The point about going with a buddy is really important because I was thinking about doing a trip that would be on my own and I wouldn't have a buddy with me, and so I really have to think about maybe I do need to invite a friend with me
Yeah.
because
And also in addition to safety, the curiosity buddy
yes. Well,
is
I do have a few
magnifies, right?
curiosity buddies, but they tend to not necessarily be like let's spend 3 hours looking at the same leaf and picking it apart kind of people. So it's
Yeah.
you got to find the right people to but so what this led me kind of thinking down is the question of if you were going to offer a trip like this, I would have to think about whether I was going to be just like physically able to do these kinds of activities and whether I would enjoy doing that, whether it would actually work with my body enough that I would actually get something out of it. And also, whether I would have fun going and looking at bugs while everyone else was in the water,
hmm
perhaps. But like what I feel that I was missing out. So what I started thinking about, and the thing that I think would be good to think about is what things could I try out and test out some of these ideas and these processes on my own in the place where I live before hopping on a plane to Hawaii or driving to the Everglades or down to Key West or whatever, and just to both practice the drawing, also practice wearing a wetsuit or wearing using a snorkel or possibly standing up in the water and seeing how well I can actually see into it. I don't have any places that have waves like the ocean that I could go to unless I want to, drive a good distance to a place that has a beach. Um, but I have there's a public swimming pool. So could I practice doing things there? How different would that be? Um, and so, so could I try out? Is it going to be a situation where I am just so uncomfortable with the difficulty of breathing through a snorkel that I find that it isn't worth it? I would want to find that out. I want to. So it makes me think that anybody who's considering doing this trip may have a similar concern. And so it might be good to have some discussion, some suggestions about how to try out these things, what kind of equipment to try, and how to practice this before you commit to doing a trip like this. Um, and it sounds like what you're kind of thinking about supplying a lot of the equipment on the trip, which makes a lot of sense because a lot of this stuff is very expensive to buy, and I don't think I want to buy a snorkel if I'm not going to actually use it a lot. But just it seems like it's worth thinking about for you how you can make recommendations for how people can then test out these things, figure out if it's going to work for them. Maybe it turns out that this is just a trip that you should only sign up for if you are already an experienced snorkeler. That might be the answer. I don't know, or maybe I'm something else. I don't know. But that seemed like that was the thing I thought. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome.
That makes a lot of sense. And there's there are um, aspects of this that I think kind of make things logistically easier. For instance, I discovered that like when I'm in a wetsuit, the wetsuit floats, and so I'm like this, and I'm just at the surface of the water. I'm not going anywhere.
Right.
Um,
But if you're in a place that has a lot of waves and currents, and if you're not a strong swimmer,
right,
being able to control where you are might be harder if you're not touching the ground.
right, right.
That's a concern for
Yeah.
me because, again, I'm not a strong swimmer, and I think that I would kind of, at least initially, until I'm comfortable, I'd want to be able to know that I could, even if I do, let myself float in the water. I'd want to have some control over how deep the water is, and know that I can stand up if I need to. And the wetsuit might make that harder. I don't know.
Um, on this on my most recent trip, I spent, some time snorkeling in sort of deeper water, but some of my I had the most fun. I was probably in water that was less than a meter deep.
Mhm.
All the rocks were right in front of me. And all the critters were there. Because I was in the wetsuit, I was floating at the surface above it all, so I wasn't bumping into any of the rocks.
Not
Had I
kicking up
wanted to
in
stand
or
up,
anything.
it would have been below my waist. And that just
Mhm.
logistically, and also in that area, in that spot, the waves weren't big. So that's where I found. I just got to show this to you again because it was adorable. Napkin. I just love this guy. It had this
It,
like these little party hat things coming out the end, and then the thing was like crazy sticky. It like wrapped all around my arm, and it was like all on me, and I'm like, "Wow, you're so cool!" And the
it's slowly squeezing in on you while you're just admiring it. I
yeah,
bet.
well, it wasn't, it's just
No,
kind of it's just being this
not
little
an anaconda, but I
self.
can imagine that if
Yeah,
there were an anaconda giving you a hug, you'd be
yeah,
admiring it.
that's true. Um,
It makes me very happy, by the way, that of all of the wonderful sea life that you saw, your favorite was an invertebrate because yeah,
Invertebrate love.
no spine means you've got more room for love in your heart, right?
More room for love. That's
Mhm.
right. Or more chambers in your.
Yeah, or more room for love in your sort of long heart-like
That's
organ
right.
that extends down your back.
That's
Yeah.
right.
But to answer your question about like levels, I think there's a lot of different levels. And so that's why I really advocate for doing
Yeah.
tide pools. And so that can just be practice walking over uneven ground.
Mhm.
So putting on like slippers or reef shoes and just practicing walking over any kind of like, and just that sort of balance that can happen.
Mhm.
I actually will kind of like do this like crab crawl thing a lot of times when I'm checking out tide pools because it's so slippery. And so any sort of like that sort of like just practicing uneven ground. A lot of like getting in and out of the water is like kind of the uneven ground. And then sand is really soft. And so practicing walking barefoot, just even walking barefoot around your own house is like great
Mhm.
practice if you're going somewhere tropical. Because if you wear shoes all the time, your feet just don't have that strength. And then you start to, so just like at that sort of level, just being able to look into the beautiful water. I mean, I've been to Florida. There's plenty of places where you can just kind of stand and look down in the water and see. I mean, like the whatever the stingrays. I was like the things
Mhm.
that go like this on the ground.
Mhm.
The stingrays, a lot of you can like see them, kind of fly up. And so, those are like that's kind of one sort of level, and so you can definitely enjoy and get a ton out of. I mean, and there's stuff happening on the shells on the sand, and just seeing the birds flying around. There's just like a
Yeah,
lot, and
like
the seaweed that
and
washes up,
I've
and then
been
this
been to
inside this.
Florida.
Oh,
Yeah,
sorry.
there's enough to occupy you for
Yeah,
hours and hours and hours just by looking at the shells on the sand and the
yeah.
occasional little critter in there. So
Exactly. Yeah, we're
absolutely.
in the seaweed too, like they live inside the seaweed. So like those are all different options. The next level, just practicing like holding your breath and putting your face in the water, just without anything. You can just kind of if you don't have any eye problems, like a lot of times you can just kind of do that and have an experience. My daughter, I don't even know if she snorkels now, but we just would put regular goggles on her and she would just do like a breaststroke and kind of put her like take a deep breath and then look around and
Mm.
then kind of do like a breaststroke and then like look down, and that's how
Yeah, that's a
she
good point. You really
snorkeled.
don't even need to
Yeah,
have a
you don't
snorkel.
need a
Yeah.
snorkel gear. Like you can just put your like hold your breath and put your face in the water, and that's much easier in terms of, especially if there's any sort of splashing happening or you're having any sort of breathing, you can really regulate your own breathing a lot easier that way. Um, so just practicing, like just a breaststroke and putting your face in the water and coming up and practice that experience of holding your breath and kind of knowing that limit and that kind of experience, and how your body feels being physically active and holding your breath at the same
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
It's just like a
Well, and it
different,
does, yeah.
you know?
It does seem like the practicing of like having your clipboard with your mirror
Yeah.
paper or whatever, and that whole process, it seems like, because obviously a lot of experimentation went into you figuring out what would work for you. Yeah. Also, so for the standpoint of planning a trip, it sounds like maybe a consideration would be, for every excursion that you do, sort of be thinking about, are there going to be interesting things to do for people at a variety of levels,
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
or specifically planning, okay, this is going to be a small trip, we're taking 7 people max, and they all have to be level 3 snorkelers, whatever, they all have to have a certain level of skill so that we can go on excursions X, Y, and Z that are going to require that skill. You could do that. You could plan a trip that specifically is for people who have, like a certain level of experience with that, or don't require that experience, and then consider what opportunities would be available at any given location that you go to. Because some beaches don't have tide pools, but
Yeah.
they
I
all
mean,
have interesting things. So,
what I
yeah.
was thinking of, like, if there was like a Hawaii retreat, is you would have kind of like one day where you're like, okay, if you are up for snorkeling, then you do like
Mhm.
an add-on, where
True,
it
yeah.
is like you go with a guide,
Mhm.
and because they can get you in a boat and they can get you out to places where you can really see some animals, and then I mean, there's, as we just talked about, like you just go to the tide pools and you can just wade in the water and see so much, and there's so many amazing places. So there would be kind of two different, the group could split, so people could have those options for sure. Yeah. I mean that's what I would envision if I did
Yeah,
something
makes
like
fun.
that. I mean, I would, yeah, I think, and I'd be interesting now that I'm like we're talking about it. I'm kind of interested in talking to some of like the local snorkel groups and seeing if there is one that would be interested in doing like a nature journaling specific one. I have a friend who has, I'm part of my goal is to try to have nature journal educators like connected across all of our islands, because we can't, it's so hard to, I can't just drive to all of Hawaii and teach everybody. So trying to get people educating nature journaling across all of the islands. And so I have a woman on Maui who does, they do dive tours. And so they have their own boat and they go out from Maui Kahana. And so I have talked to her, and she's she does like the, plein air painting classes. And so, but it's a lot logistically, for like a 2 hour tour to also be doing, this sort of thing. And so, but she is looking to add something like that as part of her guided adventure. But yeah, but that's like that upper level of things, but it's just getting my brain going and firing in all sorts of different ways, this conversation
Yeah.
right now.
And Quentin and Chris are also chiming in that places like Belize, the Marquesas Islands, Bora Bora, and Tonga also might be places to explore where there's sort of good, accessible biodiversity, and places where there might be some support services for getting some group snorkel in. I'd like to bring Leslie into this conversation as well. Um,
I would
uh,
also say, I would also just briefly put in a plug for myself to do this as well, but to not neglect the places closer to home that maybe aren't famous for their biodiversity, but still will have interesting things to see, and they might not be as colorful as what you saw, but that's okay. That just means you can save money on colored pencils. Um, I for one, if I get out to Cape Cod again this summer, I would like to be able to, maybe I'll take the plexiglass and see if I can like see what's actually in there in the water, and it won't be as colorful, but there are things to see.
Yeah, that's a really, really good thought. It's not where you look, but how you look.
Um,
Um,
think it
Leslie, thank you for being with us.
think it from a Californian to say it's all about how you look. Um,
Oh, not like that.
Uh,
And you look marvelous.
I can tell by your eyes you have the legs of a dancer. Um, so the context is I lived in Oahu 9 months, and we did a lot of snorkeling. You know, we could catch a little snorkeling in before before work, but that was 30 years ago. Um, so I'm hearing some things that makes me think that people who haven't snorkeled a lot, um, there might be some confusions, and there might be big changes in the last 30 years. Uh, yeah, the first time that we went snorkeling after my husband got prescription goggles, we were in 4 hours, and oh my God, were we cold when we came out, right? So 4 hours is way too long. 2 hours is probably too long. I mean, when you're just to allay Susan's thought of, well, what do we do when everybody else snorkels? Probably people would be in the water, what, 45 minutes?
Mm.
So,
Yeah, I guess it depends on water temperature. It depends on how cool the treats are. Um, and also if people have shorty wetsuits or things like that, allows you to stay in much longer. Um, so I think it's a place that's generally warm. But then if you augment that, you don't get cold, and that's crazy. Being a Northern Californian, thinking of going in the water and not getting cold, but.
well, um,
But I do like the idea of, like, that there that also with this crew, wherever we go, whether it's shells on the beach, whether it is things offshore, whether it is looking at a lovely bunch of coconuts. Um, there are wonders wherever we go.
okay. Um, and we and this is something that maybe is a change in the last 30 years. We found that between fins and snorkel and our body mass, but we were 30 years trimmer, uh we floated just fine, right? The quote, oh, it's the only sport you can do with every muscle in your body relaxed. So you're not putting out a lot of energy keeping yourself buoyant. Is that still how things go, Kate?
Can you repeat that? I didn't quite.
Oh, so we found that between with just the gear, the fins and such, and our own bodies, but we were 30 years trimmer than we are now. Uh, we did not have to spend any effort keeping ourselves buoyant.
I think it depends on the body type and the salinity of the that location too can kind of affect it. I and yeah, and whether you're wearing like a wetsuit or not, and whether you have that practice. I actually generally don't wear fins when I'm snorkeling, depending on the location, unless there's a current, just because I like that freedom of movement. I so
Ah,
and I
that's
think and I think it's also just level of practice too, of just how of staying like really horizontal and letting kind of the ocean float you. It doesn't come naturally to everybody. And as I said, like different body types just float better than others. And then just kind of getting that feeling. Yeah, yeah, there's a lot of kind of different ways to experience the ocean and to snorkel and to feel it, and different combinations of fins and no fins and flotation things. I mean, I think honestly, like if somebody does have trouble floating, like there's like these little like mini boogie boards that I found really useful. I no longer need to so when I first started snorkeling, I spent a lot of energy staying above the water and staying just because I'm me, my body type is a little bit more, and I was
You're,
also probably more
you're a
muscly.
sinker.
I was a sinker. I was not a swimmer. And so I finally, with more time, I've gotten more comfortable with it, but I kind of have to be a little bit more conscious. So I wear a wetsuit pretty much all year round here, if I'm going to be in the water.
Hmm.
Um,
Okay.
You wear a shorty or long sleeve and like,
it just depends on what I'm feeling like. I'll wear both. I don't have the full wetsuit. I actually, when I did my dive training, I wore a shorty underneath a full length one. Like, and I was still actually kind of cold. So, yeah, I think people just, I think also, um, living out here, your blood literally thins. Um, that's something I always tell people too. The big thing is drinking enough water because you're diluting your blood. Your blood gets diluted in order to cool you off more efficiently. And so when people talk about having thin blood in warm places, it's literal. And so the more time, so if you're coming from somewhere cold and coming to Hawaii, you can spend a lot more time in the water before you get cold than somebody from here. So because your body just physically adjusts to the different temperature. Um, so that also has an impact.
another strategy is just to put a pool noodle under your armpits.
Yes.
And that puts you into a kind of good face forward sketching position,
Yeah.
which is compatible with a snorkel and
Hmm.
mask and rocks covered with nudibranchs.
Okay. Interesting. Yes. So the fins or no fins makes a big difference. And there's been a lot of talk about standing up and shallow and all this stuff. And I think people who've never gone snorkeling don't realize just how extremely shallow the water can be, where you can be having a good snorkeling experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or that surprised me on this last trip. I would sometimes I'd be like looking at the critters. I'm just so into the sketching and the looking and the observing, and then I realized that like, oh, I'm right next to the shore,
Right,
and people walking. I kind of look up and there's somebody standing on the shore looking down at me. I'm going, what are you doing?
right.
Yeah,
You're looking at someone's
that
ankle.
doesn't need to be deep to be cool.
Yep.
Yeah, there's a lot of areas where it like starts off like sandy and then kind of you hit that coral edge and you can kind of like float a little bit over it and come kind of back out and stand. I get nervous when people talk about like it being shallow enough to stand in just because, oh my gosh, who's out at the ocean right now? Just
I
because
This is
I I
Jason.
just saw this. Look, this, and is this mangrove we've got going on here?
Yeah, this is
Jason,
Jason. I'm here in Sarasota, Florida. Can you hear me okay?
Roger that. Yeah.
So this is the area that we go snorkeling in. It's right here in New Pass. Out there is the Gulf, and over here is Sarasota Bay. That's our research vessel, the Eugenie Clark.
Oh, I
And
love that name.
and I put a link
I was
into
thinking Eugenie Scott. Who's Eugenie Clark?
she's better known as the Shark Lady. She founded a lab 70 years ago south of us in a place called Cape Hayes.
All
And so
right.
the Marine Lab is got a public aquarium associated with it too. In fact, this summer we're opening up a brand new one. It's a $130 million facility about 10 miles inland from us. But right now the public aquarium is just on the other side of that. And this is our marine science education building. And so we take students of all ages from pre-K to Gary out here into the seagrass beds. I just wrapped up a Florida Master Naturalist program where we did a series of dip netting and snorkeling adventures out here. The challenge is our dock was wiped out during Hurricane Milton, but we're in the process of rebuilding that so that it has nice, easy, ADA accessible access down here into the seagrass beds. So not as colorful as a Hawaii coral reef, but there are a lot of fun, interesting critters out here, and seahorses. Manatees show up sometimes, dolphins, plus a variety of coastal birds, pelicans, egrets, terns. And this is the New Pass location. And then on the other side of our island is, because we're out here between Lido Key and Longboat Key, is an area we call the Chicky. It's kind of like a tiki hut, but it's a traditional kind of pole barn built by the Seminole Indians with thatched roof. We just had that rebuilt. And on the other side is what we call Pansy Bayou, which has a little bit different ecosystem, a little more gentle shoreline. But there's a variety of seagrass and South Florida mangrove type ecosystems
Yeah.
along here.
What species of mangrove do we have here? Is this?
This is a buttonwood, I believe. Yeah, this looks like a buttonwood to me. And I don't see any buttons on it, but I'll look around and see if we can find some. And
Oh, this is cool.
And it has two varieties. There's another one over here that has kind of a silvery leaf to it that's used as an ornamental hedge. Same species as far as I know, but a little bit more hirsute. And
Cool.
they have a silvery sheen to the leaf as a consequence. There's also sea grape in front of us. And then
So
down here, of course, are the famous red mangroves with the prop roots that we were just looking at.
yeah, out here at the edge, with these little prop roots coming down, are these the red?
Yeah, so this is a red mangrove here. And
Yeah.
you can see the adventitious roots coming down, and they use that to support them. They're usually, the classical ecology is you have the red most closest to the ocean, absorbing most of the waves, and just behind it is something called black mangroves, which have these little snorkel-like roots coming up. They call them pneumatophores. And then just behind that is something called the white mangrove, which has a little less root structure and is usually further inland,
Yeah,
just a shave.
that is really cool. Now this was um so what would you recommend in terms of accessibility meets biodiversity meets warm water for the sort of things which we're talking about here? What are some
Well,
places?
oh yeah, this is warm water. You could soak in here all day, especially this time of year. You see sunscreen. This water is knee deep to about chest deep, depending on how far you want to go out. And it's a nice little, oh, look, there's a skimmer, a black skimmer going across.
Oh,
That's an awesome bird. They have been nesting in our area, but I don't know how well they're doing this year with the hurricanes. They wiped out a lot of the areas. Maybe in a future one, I have this dwarf telescope that I've been experimenting with to get better zoom in for virtual programming and doing coastal bird watching. But warm waters here. You see Southwest Florida seagrass critters, so blue crabs, stone crabs, seahorses, pipefish. The only challenge is red tide sometimes. That's usually in August, November, it creeps in. And it's usually gone by the rainy season, which starts right around now, April, May,
mm-hmm.
in a typical pattern. But all of this was absolutely covered in mangroves, but kind of got kiboshed by Milton and Helene. But we're going to put in a new decking and dock structure back into here. And it should be fairly easy to then have the dock come down here and just basically walk gently down into the sandy area you see in front of me. And then out into the seagrass, which is, again, anywhere from ankle to chest deep, depending on the tide.
Yeah.
And so you could spend all day out here on this location or on the opposite side of the lab, which is got a similar kind of structure, but is even a little gentler because the boat traffic is less. This is a main pass right here, so boats do come in and out of it. But the other side is kind of closed off.
Wow. Jason, could I get you to shoot me your contact information?
Oh, sure thing.
I'm I'm John Muir Laws at johnmuirlaws.com. And I'd love to be in touch. It sounds like you'd be a really good person whose brain to pick about.
Yep. Yeah, this would be great. And I'm working on my practicum for the nature journaling, and I'm hoping to introduce that whole concept into our own adult programming as well as kid programming in the fall.
Oh, fantastic.
It's been very inspirational following along on your virtual adventures.
Do you have anything to add, Jason, about when we were talking about like safety and things to consider when taking groups out snorkeling?
Don't do what I'm doing right now, which is walking on this little retaining wall, delicately
What could possibly
balancing.
go wrong?
But we do have certified lifeguards available. Again, it would depend on the number of people in the program. But we have hosted groups like that from Earthwatch and other groups, Center for Talented Youth. And all of them have come out and had wonderful adventures. We're an independent nonprofit marine research laboratory. And so we do have paid programs, so that would have to be factored into it. But of course, maybe we get grants and things like that to help facilitate people who need that consideration for
And
scholarships or
what is the
whatever.
name of the institution?
It's called Mote Marine Laboratory and Aquarium, MOTE. Go to mote.org, mote.org.
Great.
And we're actually celebrating our 70th anniversary this year.
Oh, happy 70th.
Yeah.
You guys make
It'd
it look good.
also be interesting too. I could work with our archivists and librarians to maybe get some of the original nature journaling sketches that Dr. Clark did. And I put the link again into the chat space, and we could see some of her sketches as well. If you all came out here for a program.
That's fantastic. Wow. This really makes me think that the logistics of making something like this happen might be closer at hand than we think.
Yeah, you could do it tomorrow if you want.
All right, I'll hop a plane.
Yep.
Let's see. Actually, tomorrow's not good for me, but we're going to be in touch. This sounds very interesting.
And then, like I said, we do have a number of facilities down in the Florida Keys where we do coral reef restoration, but that's a whole nother work group and a whole nother kettle of fish, if you will. But certainly could be a possibility too, because we have a number of coral reef nurseries down there and a lot of very talented and capable staff that could probably host a group like you're proposing.
This sounds
Do you
very
work with Jasmine Graham at all?
Yeah,
The
she's
Sharks
great.
Don't
She
Think?
actually worked here at Moat for a while, and now
Yeah,
she's part of
I remember
MISS.
in her book.
Yep. And she's,
Cool.
I think, still living in the area. I could be wrong.
Oh, cool. I love her book. Yeah, I recommend it. Sharks Don't Sink.
Yeah.
Really interesting insight into shark research.
All right. This has been a very interesting discussion, and I am really glad that you are on the call today, Jason and Kate. Thank you both so much. Leslie, thank you for your insights. Susan, also really appreciate that. I think that we need to let people kind of get to their lunches right now. There's actually a taco waiting for me, so that
Right.
does motivate me to um, get out of my chair. But want to encourage people to. I had an amazing time bringing nature journaling to my snorkeling experience, just sort of thinking of um, how can we use the tool of attention that journaling brings to us in a different habitat. Um, I also am really grateful to this kind of being able to crowdsource things in this community to get some really good ideas up and in front of us for thinking about how we can make things like this work. Um, so perhaps, folks, keep your eye out in the future for a snorkeling opportunity with some nature journaling friends. It might be a reason to go do a little bit of ecotourism in either Hawaii or Florida. Um, the and In the meantime, stay curious. Want to encourage people to come on out. Uh, to join us on a regular basis. We have conversations here on all sorts of different topics, and you all are welcome to join us. If there are topics that you would like to see covered in an educator forum, for instance, if you have a project that you're working on and you want to kind of kick that can around with people in this community, shoot me an email and say, hey, let's do one on this topic, and we'll see what we can do to make those happen. Again, thank you all for being here. Kate, really good to see you.
Oh, keep an eye out in your PO box. I sent you something as well.
All right. I will take so in email.
PO box, mail,
Oh,
physical mail.
lucky you said that. Otherwise, I wouldn't go check it. I will go see. Um, and and until we meet again, friends, be well, be kind. Let's get out regularly into nature and celebrate this one wild and precious life that we have an opportunity to explore. And let's also take advantage of our resources to protect the beauty and wonder of this earth. It's not ours. It's just it's on loan from future generations and from all the other species. And we've got a duty to do what we can do to take care of this place. Thank you, friends. Bye bye.